good to sort of see you. It's been such a long ordeal, such a long year. Remember back in March when our ordeal began? When suddenly we went from being a hyper nation to hibernation. A few days in, I can remember looking out the window of my house at the first snow of the winter, which occurred on the 4th day of spring. Should have known back then. And this deer was looking back at me, really close to the house. It was probably wondering why the woods had become so quiet. Forget about the fact that it was snowing so late in the season, finally. It almost seemed to be saying goodbye to me, like, I'll see you when you come back out here, when it's safe for you to come back outside. And it struck me I was so close to this deer that I didn't sort of step back and recoil, Lyme disease almost seemed beside the point, like a quaint relic of the past. I yearned for the nostalgic days of Lyme and West Nile and that quiet place where the deer and the antelope and the infected ticks play. I dreamed of the normal flu, any virus, without those scary red prongs. We quickly realized that we needed to be more comfortable within our skin and our shelters. We needed to sort of set ourselves up to be in this for the long haul. And then all live sports stopped suddenly, immediately. So we started to spend our days watching Michael Jordan championships from 25 years ago and speculating about what it would be like if we have hockey in August. Back in March, we decided to run a SNAP food drive here, and we collected 1,214 pounds of food overnight. Back in March, Love Thy Neighbor trended number 3 on Twitter, and kids compared their predicament to Anne Frank, who also suddenly was trending on Twitter and all over social media. You can see on your screen what some of the younger people were saying, teenagers especially, and how they related to her during their first days of lockdown. Back in March, we started weekly healing services and daily afternoon minions here that we have not stopped ever since. And we've gotten a minion almost every day. We needed them. Those little Zoom boxes that have become so ubiquitous, we're so used to them now, but those smiling faces, the sweetness and excitement of people catching up, feeling seen, having their feelings validated, that was so important back then. As April and May turned to June, we tried to make our quarantine as Jewish as possible by coming together on Friday evenings on Zoom, or by binging on Mrs. Maisel, Unorthodox, Shtizel, Fauda, and the all-too-prophetic Plot Against America. We prepared for a Passover different from all other Passovers. We were slaves in a very different Egypt, dealing with a very different plague. In New York, they cheered frontline workers every night from their windows. In Jerusalem, they counted minions from balcony to balcony. June turned to July, then August, then September. And now we stand between past and future. We're still looking back at the Michael Jordan of 1999 and the great Spanish flu of 1918, the slave ship of 1619, women's suffrage of 1920, and the Tulsa massacre of 1921. And the Holocaust, always the Holocaust, which ended 75 years ago, but never really ends. We've been living in history, looking back so much, and looking ahead with so much uncertainty and trepidation, and a recognition of the fragility of life under this sword of Damocles. That's how we felt this year. That's how we feel right now. In essence, the past 6 months have been one long Yom Kippur. As we've reflected on our mortality like never before, every day of the past 6 months has been like today. Each of us felt that we were in that ICU at Stamford Hospital or Mount Sinai or Elmhurst in Queens, even if we weren't really there. We saw those refrigerated trucks. We were at those Potter Field burials. We saw how utterly overwhelming and hopeless it seemed. We've literally experienced 100 9/11s these past 6 months. We don't want to go back to where we were in March and April, to be sure, but now it is the 7th month. And in the 7th month, you shall afflict your souls, Leviticus tells us in today's Torah portion. Ta'anu et nafshotechem. The Hebrew root, ayin nun he, means to afflict, but it also means to answer. On Yom Kippur, the affliction is the fasting that helps us find the answers. But for our 7-month-long Yom Kippur, the affliction has been COVID itself. And so now we've reached Yom Kippur. The 2 different Yom Kippurs have come together. The 1-day Yom Kippur, the 7-month-long Yom Kippur. Now together, this is the day of the great reset, when everything starts anew. Now we can look back at what we've experienced so that we can begin to propel ourselves forward. Yom Kippur is a celebration of R-E, regret, repent, reset, reassess, resolve. And so we shall afflict ourselves today through fasting. By the way, if you're healthy, and if you're not, you shouldn't. But at the same time, the biblical command is to seek answers. Ta'anu et nafshotechem, inquire of your souls, answer the questions. The Jewish educator Daniel Hartman says that as we look back at this period, we should consider, quote, not how it has redefined the meaning of life, but how these past few months can help teach us to live a life of meaning. How did we, in the midst of our brokenness, recalibrate our thought processes? So let me today share some of the wisdom that I've garnered these past several months while dwelling in the Rabbi's bunker. First, this was a year of the great softening. There was a video that went completely viral by Thomas Roberts. You probably saw it at one point. During the first months of the shutdown, it was called The Great Realization. It was an inspiring poem. It was narrated by this man talking to his child at some point in the future, looking back. It's been viewed by over 60 million, or at least 60 million times. It's been translated into 20 languages. So here's some of what it said. While we all were hidden amidst the fear and all the while, people dusted off their instincts and they remembered how to smile. And with the skies less full of the voyagers, the earth began to breathe. The beaches bore new wildlife that scuttled off into the seas. Some people started dancing, some were singing, some were baking. We'd grown so used to bad news that some good news was in the making. So when we found the cure and began to go outside, we all preferred the world we found to the one we left behind. Old habits became extinct, and we made way for the new, and every simple act of kindness was now given its due. But, the child asks, why did it take a virus to bring the people back together? Sometimes you have to get sick, my boy, before you can get better. In an interview, Roberts talked about what led to his hopeful vision. He talked about his long walks during the lockdown, and they'd been filled with smiling strangers that they would pass. You know, it's hard to see the smiles under the masks. You have to really be looking for something different. You have to see the whole face light up, and he did. And he saw teddy bear hunts and sidewalk chalk saying, "Be kind." And he realized that in a world where it's bold to be kind, that everyone has made sacrifices, big and small, to protect each other and the most vulnerable members of society especially. How amazing it is that we achieved all this together, going from individual to collective action in a heartbeat. Now, many of us missed human connection, he adds. Family, friends, colleagues. We missed being out in nature, surfing, fishing, playing sports in the park. But people didn't miss the shopping so much, the business travel, the pressures, the expectations that kept building every year as people would try harder and harder to keep up. And he realized that the old normal wasn't actually the future that he wanted to return to. And I should mention that Roberts comes from New Zealand, where they crushed the virus, because all segments of society pulled together in common purpose. We've had some examples of that here too, even in the corporate world. Even some corporations got into the spirit of things. I was taken by this essay by the great Israeli novelist David Grossman, who wrote during the first phase of the crisis again. He said, "It is possible to hope that perhaps when the plague ends and the air will be filled with feelings of healing and recuperation and health, a different spirit will pervade humanity, a spirit of easefulness, a new freshness. Perhaps people will begin to reveal, for example, engaging signs of innocence, unspoiled by cynicism. Perhaps, and this is key, perhaps softness will suddenly become, for a certain time, legal tender. Maybe we'll understand that the murderous plague has given us an opportunity to slice from ourselves layers of fat, of swinish greed, of thick, undiscriminating thought, of abundance that became excess and has already begun to suffocate us. Why in the world do we collect so many objects? Why did we heap up our lives until life itself was buried beneath mountains of objects that have no object?" he wrote. And then he concluded, "For surely we are all one infectious human fabric, as we are now discovering. Surely the good of every person is ultimately the good of us all." And so I can ask, maybe this great realization has led to a great softening. In our moments of optimism, we can think that society has changed like that. Even the highly polarized, charged election campaign that we're in right now. It's polarized and charged to even life-saving measures like wearing a mask. But even that cannot wipe away what we have seen before our eyes. We saw those cheers every evening at 7 o'clock. We saw the tears in the ERs across America. We saw the softening. Rabbi Karen Kedar wrote this: "I wanted to see the sunrise in hope of awakening my spirit. So I forced myself out of bed in anticipation of the dawning light. There was only darkness, though. Eventually, the clouds in the sky took on form, puffs of gray and charcoal and shapes of billow. But they offered me little comfort. I rose to see the sun. I wanted to see the bright colors reaching, climbing, flying up to the top of the sky, but not this morning." And then it happened. The clouds began to dance across the heavens. Subdued colors, nuanced shapes, layers of softness. And to my heart. And I whispered, "There is softness in this sadness." And I blessed the day. Maybe there has been a great softening. And if so, then maybe this great softening has led to a great stillness. This poem by Kitty O'Meara shows how. "And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows. And the people began to think differently, and the people healed. Pico Iyer, the author of The Art of Stillness, wrote about a trip that he took, landed him at the airport in LA. He was in the United Airlines lounge, and suddenly he saw a quiet room. And everyone was grabbing pieces of cheese and watching CNN. But then he stepped into this quiet room, and he could have been miles and miles away. It was softly lit, candles. And he said, all I could do was, I wanted to close my eyes, but I was just overwhelmed by the quiet. The stillness was an active presence. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was the presence of a kind of quiet that had laid out. And then he adds, suddenly when you start to watch things and you start to listen to things, even if you're a journalist without religion, the world becomes richer. Suddenly you're hearing the birds, you're seeing, you're listening to the tolling of bells, you're seeing detail. The lockdown forced us to listen to birds. One day, the New York Times had a guide to bird watching. Now, they have lots of articles about birds, but they had a lot of articles about birds the last few months. Right there in the New York Times, no Broadway reviews, just reviews of the broad-winged hart, a hawk. Not just one article, but many, many articles. The lockdown forced stillness upon us. And if that wasn't enough, then Hurricane Isaias charged up the coast and nearly blew us away. The prophet Isaiah, for whom the hurricane was named, proclaimed, Yavesh chatzir navel tzitz, ki ruach Adonai nashvabo. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the wind of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people is grass, which withers and the flower fades, but the word of the Lord endures forever. You might recognize this passage from the end of the Unatana Tokef prayer. This storm, this wind of God, forced us to come face to face with our powerlessness in the face of nature. And if we weren't feeling vulnerable already, we really felt vulnerable after that. So I read by candlelight. No TV, no computer. I felt like, I was in Little Women. And I went to bed really early, woke up at the crack of dawn to milk the cows. And then when there weren't any cows, I let out the dog and took a walk around the neighborhood and saw things I hadn't seen before. And I heard things that I'd never heard. That fawn from last March was still around. She brought a few of her friends, as if to say, welcome back. Welcome back. There's a Hebrew expression from mindfulness. It's yeshuv hada'at, which means literally a settling of the mind. A yeshuv in Israel is a settlement. A calming, a settling, and a return. Because it has the same root as teshuvah. It's a return to our deepest selves. The Talmud states, there are three things which bring yeshuv hada'at. Kol, mar'eh, v'reach. Pleasant and enjoyable sounds, sights, and aromas. What we see, what we hear, what we smell. These were the things that the dreaded disease took away from many people, plus the sense of taste. But these are the things that we cherished more than ever before, and we returned to them. And while this stillness was happening, our planet jumped at the chance to catch its breath. There was an essay on 60 Minutes that remarked of how Mother Earth was starting to clear her throat, even at the beginning of 2020, with all those Australian bushfires and Earth having its highest temperatures since record-keeping began, and icebergs and glaciers melting, Locusts, swarms of locusts in Africa. All these things were happening even before the plague. But then this worldwide stillness occurred. In that essay, there was a man from India who talked about how his country has 17 of the 25 of the world's most polluted cities. In Delhi, he said, in the winter months, sometimes the smog isn't just outside your house, it's inside your house, inside the room. It's terrible. And suddenly, in India, they were seeing blue skies. Miraculous. It's nothing, by the way. One day I drove on the Merit at 4 o'clock, and there was no traffic. And the only reason it didn't happen any more often is that I hadn't been on the Merit for a month before that day. I was part of the reason there was no traffic. From Shanghai to Secaucus, by circumstance and not design, we got a glimpse of a changed world, of life, with fewer fossil fuels. The skies, they were cleaner, the roads less congested, city streets were taken back by pedestrians, noise level was reduced, wild animals reclaimed places they had long since abandoned. Wild boars roamed the streets of Haifa, deer in Paris, dolphins in Istanbul, jellyfish in Venice, cougars near the Santa Monica Freeway, that's the 10 for those who speak Californiaese, goats in Wales, a kangaroo hopping through Adelaide, a puma on the streets of Santiago, and jackals in Tel Aviv. Maybe this will mark a turning point so that, as environmentalist Bill McKibben wrote, future generations will not curse us, they'll thank us. Now, 60 Minutes called this the reckoning, saying that life changed abruptly, profoundly, and irretrievably. So we had this year the great realization, the great softening, the great stillness, and the great reckoning. Not bad for 7 months of hell. Ta'anu et nafshotechem. Our affliction has given way to answers. But life's great changes amount to absolutely nothing if we haven't absorbed the most important lesson of all from these past 7 months, the primacy of life itself. This afternoon, we read Leviticus 18. It has a key verse. Ushmartem et chukotai ve'et mishpatai, asher yaseh otam adam v'chai bahem ani Adonai. You shall therefore keep my Sabbaths, my statutes rather, and my ordinances, which if a person does, they shall live by them. I am the Lord. So we're told regarding the mitzvot of the Torah, v'chai bahem, that life takes precedence over just about everything else in Jewish law, including Shabbat observance. Chai bahem. We should live by these laws. And the Talmud teaches us that Shabbat is holy only because we are alive to observe it. It isn't holy in a vacuum. It needs living people. If a Shabbat falls in a forest and no one is there to observe it, it is irrelevant. If the coronavirus kills all of us when Friday evening arrives, there will be no Shabbat. We make Shabbos. Shabbat does not make itself. So life takes precedence even over Shabbat, even over Yom Kippur. And you are required to profane one Shabbat if that will enable you to live for the next one and for many Shabbats to come. So Daniel Hartman reflected on this lesson and concluded that at this moment, the most important thing is to live. Connecting to that core instinct is not trivial anymore. All the rest is irrelevant. The rest is commentary. You shall live by them, v'chai bahem. The priority of life is a powerful moral statement. Hartman is saying that the Torah doesn't think it's acceptable for people to take actions that put life unnecessarily at risk. I talked yesterday about all the heroic efforts of our essential workers. So many people put their lives on the line, and we need that. But it doesn't make you a warrior to go into a bar or to take off your mask and shrug it off and say, well, people are going to die anyway. That can never be acceptable, because simply saying people will die, even though that we know they will, never makes it acceptable. We should never try to normalize 200,000 deaths. It is what it is never what it should be. And we're all responsible to keep others alive. We're profoundly interconnected. Did you know that 70% of the coronavirus that spread in the first wave in Israel came from America? In Israel, they could have called it the Brooklyn virus. I understand more than ever before how I can be the source of harm for other people. I shouldn't just wear a mask if I care about you. I should carry an extra mask in my pocket in case the first one breaks. I hold the power of life and death over you. I could destroy a universe. As Daniel Hartman writes, the coronavirus pushes us out of a core sense of entitlement to one of responsibility. We're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Okay, so we've gone from softening and stillness to a recognition of the primacy of life. We've afflicted our souls and come up with some answers. But now, as we stand at the precipice between what was, what is, and what will be, we fear for the future. On Yom Kippur, the 10th day of the 7th month, we're beginning either the middle or the last phase of our ordeal. But we don't know how long this will last. Do we dare look beyond today to try to figure that out? Hope, in a way, seems naive, and it's become too associated with the kind of magical thinking that clouds the eyes of those seeking miracle cures just around the corner. Hope seems dangerous. Hope smells like bleach. You can't just wipe this away, and you wonder whether maybe it's dangerous to have hope. But we're the people who invented hope. How can we so wistfully discard it? And we've all faced these moments of despair. Most of us can relate to what my friend and colleague, Rabbi Sue Fendrick, expressed in a Facebook post just a month or so into the ordeal. She wrote, I heard many people independently say, after feeling it myself, that yesterday they just hit a wall. They felt the sadness and stress at a new level, or for the first time. My mom said she experienced the same thing among her friends and contacts, and she continues, I'm a big let's name it person, so let me just name this. It's not about weeks anymore. We're no longer counting in weeks. We've now been doing this for a month. She wrote this in April. To my friend, Rabbi Fendrick, hello from October. Here's a thought experiment as we question whether we can have hope moving forward. If you had the chance to tell the you who was going through this in March that you would be communally distanced still on the high holidays, would you? I'm not sure I'd give it away. Better not to know. Better to live this thing through, one day at a time, without obsessing too much on the future. There was a survey in May by the Kaiser Family Foundation which indicated that nearly half of Americans reported that the crisis was harming their mental health. And a study revealed this month said that that is even a higher number. Those Americans reporting symptoms of depression 3 times higher than before the pandemic. And it's gotten worse as people have lost jobs or suffered health setbacks or deaths in the family. So what is to become of hope? Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor and author of one of the great books of the 20th century, Man's Search for Meaning, had a term for what I think is our answer here: tragic optimism. When you look up hope in a Jewish dictionary, that's what you get: tragic optimism. Now, he said that tragic optimism, 1, turns suffering into achievement, 2, channels guilt feelings into opportunities to change for the better, and 3, derives from life's transitory nature the incentive to take responsible action. So we can keep hope alive, even if tinged by tragedy. That's what we've been doing for thousands of years. That's what makes us Jews. And we will get through this. Okay, so to review, what are some of the lessons that I think we've gained from this ordeal, or at least that I have? Great softening, great stillness, great reckoning, a reaffirmation of the primacy of life, and we've learned that hope can sustain us if it is touched by realism and acknowledges tragedy, and that what matters most is that we take responsibility. One of the Netflix series I've binged on these past several months is The Good Place. It explores deep questions about life, death, the afterlife, and in a disarmingly delightful way. It's basically Gilligan's Island meets the Book of Job, with a nod to Dante's Inferno and the Bhagavad Gita. Without giving away too many spoilers, let's just say that a key message of the series is that we never lose the capacity to continue growing, even after we're dead. In fact, and certainly while we're alive, there's always a chance to make up for past errors. It's very Jewish. And there's another key message, also a very Jewish one, that in many ways, heaven is right here. We can make this a heaven on earth. Yes, we can make this planet, we can make our home a good place, or at least a more compassionate in-between place. And these days, maybe that's good enough. Perhaps the most important message of this series is that in order to improve our lot, we need other people to help us. We need to help them too. We can't do it alone. Each of the characters is flawed, the human and the divine ones, and each flawed soul contains the key to helping one or more of the others. Heaven, it turns out, is other people. Remember how I demonstrated that the expression to afflict ourselves comes from the Hebrew root, the same one as answer? Well, there's another more common word for answer in Hebrew, and that is teshuvah, which is exactly what we've been doing during these high holidays. We will find our answer, our teshuvah, through repentance and return, through teshuvah. The story of the Good Place is about teshuvah. And that is our path forward from this mess, from this pile of ashpot. As you may remember, the name of the year means a pile of dung, basically. And we're in it right now. In its review of the final episode of The Good Place, aired just a few weeks before the pandemic began, Rolling Stone wrote this: "What that gorgeous final scene suggests is that the best possible reward would be the ability to continue to touch the lives of those we left behind, for some spark, some memory, some piece of whatever it is we may have inside us beyond biology, to linger and make the world a better place for everyone still lucky enough to be living in it. Maybe," the ending wonders, "the last time you were suddenly inspired to call up an old friend, or pick up pieces of litter that someone else dropped, or let a driver make a left turn into heavy traffic even though you had the right of way. You were in some way unconsciously inspired by a spark of goodness from someone you lost. or someone who has no one left to pass their goodness on to. Or maybe, if we're being less literal, there's a fundamental spark of goodness to humanity, despite abundant recent evidence to the contrary. And maybe, I might add, when we conquer our own inner demons of fear, cynicism, malaise, fatigue, xenophobia, narrow-mindedness, if we think of the impact of our every act, our every breath on other people, then when the time comes for us at long last to leave our bunkers for good, we'll emerge into the sunlight of a good place, a very good place, a better place than the one we escaped last March, when the first snow fell on the 4th day of spring, and that deer looked at me and said, "Goodbye for now." Next year, may we meet again, all of us, right back here, filling every seat. And may it feel as if we never left. And yet, may it also feel as if we are gathering together right here to afflict ourselves and to seek answers and to do repentance for the very first time. And may we all find safety in all of the storms that still await us as 2020 continues. And make of this year of Ashpot, this year of the dung heap, make of this year and of this place a good place, a better place, a heaven on earth. L'shana haba'ah b'temple Bethel. Next year, right here at Temple Bethel. Amen.